So we're up to Daf Samach Daled. We'll just start with Tanur Rabbanan on Samach Gimel Amid Beis. And this is the end of the long Agadatuk. Tanur Rabbanan, we learned in a Brisa. And we're going to look at a pasuk in Parshas Ba'aloscha. Uv'menucha Yomar Shuva Hashem Rivos Alfei Yisrael. When the Aron stopped, that's when Klal Yisrael encamped in the Midbar. And Moshe Rabbeinu said in front of, and Moshe Rabbeinu turned to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he said that he should bring the Shekhinah to rest on Rivos Alfei Yisrael. So let's take a look on Samach Daled. Malamed she'ein Shechina shora al pachos mishnei alofim ushnei revavos mi Yisrael. It says Rivos Alfei Yisrael. So Rivos means 2 times 10,000, because a riva is 10,000. And then it says Alfei Yisrael, which is 2 times 1,000. So all told, when you have 2 times 10 plus 2 times 1, you have 22,000. So Moshe Rabbeinu said Shuva Hashem, and he asked the Shekhinah to return because there were Rivos Alfei Yisrael. There were 22,000 Jews, and that's enough to bring the Shekhinah down. Hareisha Haisu Shahayu Yisrael Shnei Alofim Ushnei Ros Chaser Echad. And they were missing one person to complete that number. And who is that person? Vizelo Osak Bepirya Verivya. And that individual was not involved in procreation. He didn't want to bring any children into the world. Lo nimtza ze gorem l'shchina shetistalik miYisrael, question mark, because he wasn't Osek Bepirya Verivya, he didn't have a child, and that child would have completed the number 22,000. Therefore, the Shekhinah was not Chara b'Yisrael. So this is all a continuation of the brisa that was brought back on Samach Gimel Amud Beis in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, that called Misha Eno Osek B'Piri V'Rivya Ki'ilu. Whether it's Ki'ilu Shafei Tamim, or as Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah has it, Ki'ilu Memai Tadmus, and so forth and so on. So this is another element in the punishment, so to speak, to a person who is not Osek B'Piri V'Rivya. Now, in the note here on page Samach Daled, he quotes Rabbeinu Yeshaya. What's the significance of the number 22,000? He says, in the Midbar, if you take a look at the numbers as they were counted in the census, you'll see that the minyan of Levium was 22,000. And the Marsha says that this number 22,000 parallels the Markava Elyona of angels up in the celestial spheres. And he compares that to the pasuk in Tilim Samaches, Rechev Elokim Rabosayim Alfei Shna'an. Then he quotes the Torah Chaim, who says that Shuva Hashem Rivos Alfei Yisrael, because the Merkava of Shekhinah Lamala also always has a minimum of 22,000 angels. And he quotes the same pasuk in Tehillim. And when they took apart the Mishkan, and they traveled from one point to the other in the Midbar with the Aron, Moshe said, Kuma Hashem. And Nistalka Shekhinah Lamala. Because the Aron was, so to speak, in motion, it wasn't set down in a place. And that's where the Shekhinah was Shora. So now, while they were traveling, the Shekhinah went up, it descended higher, and when they set up the Mishkan and the Aron was in its place, Moshe said, Tshuva Hashem. Now the Shekhinah should return and rest in Klal Yisrael. Abba Chanan Omer Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, a person again who is not deliberately is not osik b'piri v'riv chayv misa. And there's a long discussion about this in the Ein Yaakov. Maybe we'll get a chance to look at it. Shenemar, from whence does Abba Hanan derive this conclusion? And we go back to the parsha of the death of Nadav Avihu, the sons of Aaron, as recorded in Bamidbar Perek Gimel. And it says that Ubanim lo chaya lahem, they didn't leave any children behind. And this is not coincidental that the Torah in this context, Vayomas Nadav Avihu, points out that they didn't leave any children behind. Because had they brought children into the world, lo mesu, they wouldn't have died. So what's the story here about Nadav Avihu? So first, the Ein Yaakov quotes the previous Gemara that we saw just briefly about Rabbi Lazar, Ke'ilu shofech dami. And now he's adding, Abba Hanan is adding that he's chayiv misa. Shashofech damim, you wouldn't have known for sure that just because he's considered like spilling blood, therefore he's chayiv misa. Because hahoreg ubar, if somebody kills the life of a fetus, he's not chayiv misa. He's only chayiv misa after the baby is born, as the Rambam codifies it in the second chapter of Hilchos Rotzeach. So that even though we call him a shofech damim, we don't know that he's chayiv misa. That's what Rav Hanan is adding here. Now he quotes the Maharal in Chidushei Haggados, who quotes in turn the Gemara Nedarim Samach Daled. Arba chashuvim kemeis. One of them is Misha Lo Banim. And he explains that why is a person who doesn't have children considered Ein Lo Banim? Why is he chashuv kemeis? And the answer is because he's chayiv misa, and that makes him nechshav kemeis. But there's no further analysis here of Nadav Avihu. Why did they get involved in this particular sin? Not clear to me. Going on, Acherim Omrim, a person who's not Osik Pivyarivik Gorim L'Shchina Shetistalik Mi Yisrael. He caused the Shechina to leave. And the question here raised by the Aruch LaNer is, Are Shechina Yechol Lishos Al Anoshim Acherim Mi Yisrael? Okay, so fine. This person is not Osik Pivyarivik, but why does that remove the Shechina from the rest of Klal Yisrael? And what are you going to tell me? That maybe because he wasn't Osek, we were missing that last number for the 22,000. It was Chaser Ish Echad. He says in Cain, then Rabbi Abba Hanan is really repeating exactly what we saw before, word for word. So the Aruch LaNer explains that the language of Yisrael, where it says here, Gorim l'shchina shenistalik mi Yisrael, sometimes it reflects the entire nation of Israel, like Vayichen Sham Yisrael Neged Ahar, the Af L'Gabi Yisrael Echad. But sometimes the same word of Yisrael could refer not to the entire Klal Yisrael, like it does in Vayichen Sham Yisrael, but rather to an individual member of Klal Yisrael. Like, for example, the Gemara Bava Kama said, Shar Shel Yisrael, which means the Shar, not of all of Klal Yisrael, but of one individual member, etc. So the Aruch LaNer says that that's the difference here between Abba Shol in our Gemara, Abba Hanan, and that which came before Abba Hanan. According to Abba Hanan, the cause for Siluk Shechina Yisrael is only if he causes Shetistalik Mikol Yisrael. That was the first opinion that we had before. So he was the 22nd thousandth number. However, Acherim are of the opinion that Gamal Masha Mistalekis Yisrael Echad, even if only one Jew lacks the Shechina, Ef Shalom Shegorim Shetistalik Shechina Yisrael. That's considered as if you caused the Shechina to be mistalik. Sharei Omar Akash Baruch Li Avram Lios L'chol Elokim U'Lizaracha Charecha, which means that Kevin Shelo Holid Ben Harei Ashchina Shaisa Shora Olav Eina Shora Al Beno Sheino Kayim V'Shaper Ef Shalom Shelo Goram Shegoram Shelo Tishra Shechina Al Oso Yisrael Echad V'Afim Lo Yechsar Miminyan Esrim U'Shnayim Elef. Now, how did the Acherim prove that this person causes the removal of the Shekhinah? Shenemar lios l'chol elokim l'zarach acharecha. Bizman shezarach acharecha. When a person leaves children, Shekhinah shora. But ein zarach acharecha al mi shora al eitzim ve'al ha'avonim. If the person doesn't leave a child behind, so what is Shekhinah going to reside on? There's no person for the Shekhinah to be shora. Is it going to be shora on eitzim v'avonim? That's not the ultimate account. Okay, now we begin the Mishnah, and we're referring to a person who tried hard to have children, but unfortunately, as is often the case, he was not successful. Nasa isha v'sha imas hashanim. 10 years of marriage passed, v'lo yolda, and she did not give birth. Eino rashoy libatel. He has not fulfilled his mitzvah of piri v'rivya. And he has two choices, either to divorce his wife and marry someone else, or to marry a second wife in order to fulfill the mitzvah of piri v'rivya. And we're not going to say that this woman is barren and she cannot give birth, and therefore prohibit her after he divorces her to marry anyone, but rather girsha muteris li nase liyachid. And we're going to say that she's not a barren woman, she's not an akara, but rather this person who was married to the first husband did not have the schus to build a generation with her. But if she would marry someone else, then perhaps she would have a child. So we're going to allow her to marry a second man after the first husband divorces her. However, now the Mishnah wants to know what happens if even after she marries a second man, again, the same scenario repeats itself. The Rashoy Hasheni Lishos Ima Eser Shonim. The second husband waits 10 years to have a child, just like the first husband did. V'im, if she becomes pregnant, but he pila, she miscarries, then mona mishashi pila. We start counting the 10 years from the moment of the miscarriage. So again, the 10-year period, after which he's required to either divorce his wife or marry another wife, that gets postponed until after the date of her hapola. And that's where we start counting 10 years. Tana Rabbanan. Nasa Isha B'Shayim Ma'aser Sham L'Yolda Yotzi V'Yiteng Ksuba. He has to pay the ksuba, even though it's possible that the reason why she didn't give birth is because of him. He was the cause. He's not capable of bearing a child. Nevertheless, he has to divorce her because we're afraid that maybe he could have a child, but rather lo zochali bonus mimena, but he couldn't have a child from her. However, again, she may be suitable and fine, and she could have children. Therefore, he has to pay her the ksuba. He can't prove that she's the cause of their lack of children. So we're in this suffix situation. On the one hand, we have to ask him to divorce her and hope that with another woman, he'll be zochali bonus. On the other hand, we don't know for sure that it's because of her that he wasn't able to have children, so therefore he has to pay the ksuba. Is there a source for this halacha in the Torah that after 10 years, he has to give a get? He has to find another wife. Can't prove it conclusively that he has to divorce his wife after 10 years, but we have an allusion. In the parsha of Hagar, in Bereshis Tezayin, it says, "Vatikach Sarai Eshes Avram es Hagar mitzvah shivchaso miketz eser shonim l'sheves Avram b'Eretz Canaan." So 10 years after they landed in Eretz Yisrael, and Sarai did not give birth, that's when Sarai gave Hagar a mitzvah as a shivcha to Avram. As the pasuk says, "Vatiteno soli Avram isha lo leisha." So from the fact that the Torah emphasized that Avram married Hagar after 10 years, that indicates that a person could postpone marrying another woman for 10 years. After 10 years, he's got to find himself another wife. Now it says after they came to Eretz Canaan, there were many years in Padan Aram, and Sarah didn't give birth. That when they get to Eretz Yisrael, they start a new count. So whatever years went by that they were childless in Chutzlaretz, that's not part of the cheshbon. Because then it's possible that the reason why they didn't have children is because they were living in Chutzlaretz, not because they weren't able and capable of having children. Lefichach, now that we say that Ein Yeshivas Chutzlaretz Ola Lo Min HaMinyan, it's not incorporated into the 10-year waiting period. So we should extrapolate from that if there ever is an excuse, a reason to explain why they're not having children, then we don't count it as part of the 10. It's not an automatic, absolute halacha that 10 years. Cholahu, therefore, if he was ill, O shecholsa, she was ill, O shneim chavushim bebeis hasurim, or they were locked up in a jail and that's why they didn't have relations. Eina olam lo min haminyan. Those years will not be calculated in the 10-year period of time. Amalei Raveler of Nachman. Oh, excuse me, Ira, for 1 second. Charn, do me a favor. If you can, I can't deal with. He's calling me. He's this me. He's that me. Just give him the okay.
All right. I asked you for the.
Yeah, I gave you the calendar. And let's just be over with it. It's unbelievable. Okay. So Rava asks the following question. V'leilef mi Yitzchak. If you're looking for a source from which you derive this 10-year period, wait period, then let's look at the marriage of Rivka and Yitzchak. And Rivka did not give birth, and yet Yitzchak did not marry another woman. Yitzchak was 40 years old when he married Rivka. Uksiv, Yitzchak ben Shishim Shana b'ledes Osam. So Yaakov and Esau were born when Yitzchak was 60. That means there were 20 years of marriage, during which period Rivka did not give birth. And that would lead us to a different conclusion, that 20 years is an allotment of time. Amalei, so Rav Nachman responds to Rava, we don't derive anything from Yitzchak, namely the 20-year waiting period, because the reason why Chazal say that he should divorce his wife after 10 years, maybe she's an akar, she's barren, and she cannot give birth, is because he cannot be mevatel the mitzvah of period v'rivya. But Yitzchak knew sha'akur hoya. He understood that he was the cause of the fact that she didn't give birth, and therefore he didn't divorce her. and marry another woman. Ihachi, so the Gemara says, if that be the case, Avram nami akur hoya. Even Avram, we know, was an akur, as the Gemara is going to prove. So what's the proof from Avram Avinu that he didn't marry another wife? Because the reason, right during that 10-year period, the reason why he didn't marry another wife is only because he knew he was akur. And the Gemara is going to answer that it's true that both of them, Avram and Yitzchak, were akurim. They were barren, they were incapable, and therefore they didn't marry a second wife. But we cannot derive any conclusions from Avram and Yitzchak, since they were akurim. But when the pasuk goes out of its way to say Miketz Eser Shanim Lasheves Avram Be'eretz Canaan, that pasuk is completely superfluous. Why did the Torah have to add that fact in that historical fact? So therefore, from the Yitura Dekra, from the redundancy or the unnecessary pasuk, therefore we derive conclusions for other people. That if you don't know that he's akur, he has to divorce his wife after 10 years. That's what the pasuk wants to teach us. But when the pasuk addresses Yitzchak, telling us that Yitzchak was 60 years old, that pasuk is not superfluous. It's not unnecessary. Why? Why does the Torah count the years of Yishmael? He was a Rasha, as it says, V'elu Shnei Chaye Yishmael Ma'as Shono Shloshim Shana, V'sheva Shanim 137 years. Kidei Liyaches Bohem Shnosav Shel Yaakov. By virtue of mathematical calculation, we're able to derive the age of Yaakov from the age of Yishmael. And we're talking about the age of Yaakov when he received the bracha from Yitzchak. And from the pasuk that says, V'yitzchak ben shishim shana b'ledes osam, Chazal derived the conclusion that Yaakov Avinu was not punished for the years that he studied Torah in the Beis Medrash of Shem V'Eva, because Gadol Talmud Torah mikibud avaim. Rabbi Yitzchak Avinu akur hoya. How do I know that Yitzchak was barren? Shenemar vayater Yitzchak Lashem lenochak ishto ki akara hi. And it says lenochak ishto al ishto lo nemar. If it would have said vayetar, which means hispalel, al ishto, which means because of his wife, then I would have understood that she was an akara. He wasn't mispalel for himself as an akar, but it doesn't say that. Elo linochach ishto, meaning in the presence of his wife. It should have said al ishto. And linochach ishto teaches me that malamish shneim akurim haya, so that Yitzchak was davening not only for himself but also for Rivka, because both of them were akurim. So the Gemara says, Ihachi, if it's true that they were both being mispalel, why does it say, Vayetar lo Hashem, Vatar Rivka ishto? It should have said, Vayetar lohem mi boile. They were both praying. And God should have responded to the prayers of the two of them. Why does it single out his prayers, meaning Yitzchak's prayers? And this is a very famous Rashi quotes it in Chumash, Lefisha Eina Domet Tfilas Sadik ben Sadik. Now Yitzchak is the son of Avram. L'Tfilas Sadik ben Rasha, because Rivka is the daughter of Lavan, of Besuel, I should say, who was a Rasha. Rabbi Yitzchak, Ma Hayu Avosenu Akurim. Why were Avram and Yitzchak akurim? God desires the tefillos of the tzaddikim. Rabbi Yitzchak, Loma nimshal tefillos shel tzaddikim. Ke'eser. Eser is a kind of a spade that's used to dig in the ground. And the Torah says Vayetar. Why does Vayetar mean Loshan Etar? Ma eter zeh shemahapech es hatvua mimokom lemokom. The spade is used to dig up the wheat that's piled together. And then what you do is when you dig the wheat into the spade, you lift up the spade into the air. The chita flies up into the air, and the wind carries away the chaff. Kach tfilos shel tzadikim me'afeches midosav shel Kadosh Baruch Hu midas ragzonus lemidas rachmonus. It removes the midas hadin from the midas haracham, and that's like the winnowing in that mashal. Om Rabbi Ami Avram v'Sara tumtumim hayu. It means that you couldn't tell whether they were male or female if you looked at their genital areas. Shenemar habitu el tzur. Pasuk in Yeshaya. And tzur, the word tzur, is always a reference to Avram and Sarah.